Welcome to today's interview and today's episode of In Conversation With. My name's David Savage and I'm delighted to be joined by Drew here in Nashville, CEO and founder of Crystal. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, David.
No, thank you for making time out of your busy day. So look, you live about half an hour away, founder and CEO, as we say, of Crystal. You've been here for just shy of 9 years.
Yeah, coming up, this is my 9th year.
Let's start with who Crystal are. And what you do as a business, first of all, and then dive into some topics around it.
Sure, yeah. Crystal is a personality data platform. And so what that means is that we've...
I'm glad you follow up with that, because
it's been a 9-year project of figuring out how to describe what Crystal is. Essentially, we can tell you a prediction of anybody's personality type and communication style.
Yep.
And we do that in multiple ways. One is through traditional assessments, but what really got us off the ground as a business is the ability to predict that from things like LinkedIn profiles and resumes and other information online. So in the beginning, we started with this very narrow predictive model. You can call it like a narrow AI. And we started building tools on that. And we found that people in sales, recruiting, all kinds of people-oriented businesses, a lot of communication, they started using our tools and getting insights about how to communicate better. So understanding things like risk aversion, how detail-oriented people might be, skepticism, openness, these kind of traits that are really important for communication and business. We help you identify those traits within individual people who might be customers, employees, candidates, and help you communicate better with them and then make better decisions.
So I assume that they have to sign up to the platform to be able to obviously get that data, get that insight. I mean, how much insight? Say someone wanted to contact me and say, hi David, so for example, a lot of PR companies will pitch CEOs, CIOs for the podcast that I run and say, hey, we think they'd be a good guest. But how much information would you need on me to understand how to interact with me?
Not that much. So if someone was reaching out to you, yes, they could sign up for Crystal. The best way to do it would probably just add our Chrome extension. Now there's multiple ways to get these profiles, but the Chrome extension is the most popular.
Yeah.
And if they were just looking you up for a meeting, as long as you had a reasonably well filled out like LinkedIn profile or online presence where we could find some decent job titles, interests, skills, different summary text with like writing style.
Yeah.
If we can find those traits, you don't need that much data in order to get to like an 80% threshold of accuracy for getting in like the right, it's getting really detailed here, but getting in like the right quadrant of a disc profile.
Yeah.
So not that much, and anybody can sign up for Crystal, and there's a free version of it that you can sign up for and start looking at profiles. So it's a very low barrier to entry.
So like, what kind of success rate are we talking about? Because I can tell you off the cuff, I know that if I get an email that's overly long, overly wordy, I switch off. I have a terrible attention span. Whereas if someone sends me something short and snappy, I'm more likely to reply. But how frequently do people actually put that learning into practice, and what kind of results are they getting?
It's one thing if you have the knowledge.
Yeah.
So we started there, where it's just provide the insight, the profile. And if you're familiar with DISC profiles, have you ever heard of DISC?
Honestly, no.
So it's like a 4-factor personality model. It's very old. It's like the roots of it are thousands of years old, but it started being used in business about 100 years ago. And there's a lot of other flavors of it. So you'll see a lot of 4-quadrant personality models. They're all roughly the same thing. So DISC measures dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And really those are just kind of words, but really what it's demonstrating are clusters of behavior that are usually associated with each other. So people who are very high, like high D, high I, usually very risk tolerant. People who are high S and C, usually more risk averse. And you could do the same thing, like left to right on the disc. We've got a lot of resources on our website you could see. So very much towards the right, those tend to be more open, relational by default. Towards the left tend to be a little bit more skeptical, guarded, more formal, especially in business relationships. So there's a lot to it, but when you kind of identify where someone naturally falls on that map, it's not a deterministic like prediction saying this, you will behave this way, but it more outlines natural behavioral tendencies and energy cost. How much energy does it take you to take a risk or to build a new relationship or to push back and be more critical. So that's kind of like the high level of of how the model works, but the real value is putting it into practice. So over the years, we've built tools on top of it. And the most recent one was our writing assistant, where you kind of describe how you like to get emails.
Yeah.
So that is a major piece of this. It's like when you're communicating, especially cold, when you don't know the person that well. That was a big pain point that a lot of our customers try to solve with this. So we actually built the writing assistant into Crystal Chrome extension. So in Gmail, as you're writing, it kind of finds words, phrases, and sentences that might not resonate with that personality type of the recipient. And then it kind of works like Grammarly, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And we'll give you little highlights and pop-ups and recommendations for improving it. So that tool's less than a year old for us, but it's become our most popular tool. So it's kind of the spearhead of our strategy. As far as results and people using it, a lot of the times it's just, you can view it in the ongoing usage. So we can measure things like improvements per month and qualitative feedback, but overall it's resulted in people adopting the platform a lot more. And it's actually tripled usage on a per user level. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, but interesting. And look, it's pertinent, isn't it? Because we're living increasingly in a remote world where it's harder to necessarily get in front of someone and judge it. So lots of those interactions are online and continue online. So it makes sense that people would be interested. Look, you're a serial entrepreneur. Your last business, you're based in Boston, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're from New York originally. So what brought you to Nashville at around the same time that Crystal started?
It wasn't Crystal.
Was it music?
No, it was a girl. Yeah. I at the time, I don't know if I consider myself a serial entrepreneur. I used to be, between ages like 17 and 20.
Oh, hang on. If you were a serial entrepreneur and you're still running your own business, why do you think that perhaps you?
Well, I've been doing Crystal for almost 9 years now.
Yeah.
I think this has become my thing, at least for this season of life. I think of a serial entrepreneur as someone who's like starts the thing, maybe has 2 years, moves on to the next one. I used to think that's how I used to be in my like teenage years and early 20s.
Right.
Crystal has just pulled me in. And it's funny because I have serial entrepreneur tendencies where I've probably started 5 or 6 individual web apps, like and written the code and like launched them within the time of starting Crystal, and then realized, I've got external accountability in Crystal. This actually has the most upside of any of the new ideas I can find. So Crystal's had this mechanism of like even keeping me and my own like tendencies accountable, because I will move on to shiny objects unless I've got that external accountability. And then there's on top of it where Crystal is this thing that has taken a long time to build and develop. It's an idea that requires a lot of like marinating for a long time. And now we're just kind of starting to see the market come around to it. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't really consider myself a serial entrepreneur anymore, because I think I have proven, I guess, to myself, probably most importantly, that I can stick with something for that long.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was my first like gut reaction to it. It's like, I don't think that's me anymore.
Okay.
But maybe, who knows?
So you moved to Nashville for a girl.
Yeah.
You stayed here for 9 years though, so obviously it's a good place to be.
Right. So the reason I came, that didn't work out. But Nashville.
Oh well, the fact you stayed is even more of a plus point for Nashville.
Yeah. But the city, as far as being here, and I think there were a lot of things that made me stick originally. The most obvious one was the community. Mm. Coming from Boston, I love Boston, and I go back, I feel super nostalgic. I feel more nostalgic about Boston than New York in many ways, but it's very transient. So people come there for a specific reason, and then they move on. So if I go back to Boston today, there are a handful of people I knew from 8 years ago, but most of those people are gone and moved on to various places around the world. So it makes it very, vibrant. You can get to meet a lot of people, but it was not the type of place where I could see it being easy to plant roots if you're not already from there and already have the roots there. Mm-hmm. Some people do, but for me, I couldn't see that. So coming to Nashville, I remember, this is really funny. I was 24 years old. That's when I moved down here. And it was one of the more impulsive things I've ever done in my life, because people thought I was like nuts for doing it and the reasons I was doing it. But just packed everything up in my like 2000 Nissan Altima, literally everything I owned. And I just drove down here. And then I remember pulling up to the city. There's this really cool drive when you're coming from the north where you can see the skyline. It's like my favorite view of the Nashville skyline. And it was a 2000 Nissan Altima, so I didn't have like a a plug for my iPhone at the time, right? It was just like I had to listen to the radio. So I had the radio turned on. So when you're going on a road trip and you're listening to the radio, you get a good flavor of every place you're driving through. Kind of love that about road trips. I think it might be something we've lost. It's another tangent for another conversation.
I think that might be more of an American thing. If I'm
Maybe,
honest,
yeah,
as
I
well.
think so, probably, yeah.
Britain's not that big,
Yeah.
like that,
but yeah, when you're driving through America and you just listen to the radio, you get the
flavor.
feeling. Yeah, it's cool. And I remember distinctly, I wrote this in my journal, when I drove into Nashville, I was listening to this show about plants and gardening. I don't know why I was listening to this, but it was just on the radio. And it was like a call-in show, kind of like Car Talk, that show, except it was for gardening. This was like entertaining to listen to. And I remember just a lady calling in, asking about, she planted this particular flower this way last year, and now she's working on moving it to a different part of her yard, planting it this year. And it just struck me because I had spent years without thinking about the possibility of gardening, because everybody who was my age in Boston could not plan out more than a year in advance because everybody would move every year. Even if you were living in the city, all your roommates would be gone, so you'd move to another place. So nobody invested in their backyard, like the ground. So that just struck me like so much, and I remember it stuck with me right from my beginning in Nashville. I was like, oh yeah, people plant roots here, in like the very literal sense, and then it's borne out to be true. People come and they stay, they invest in the city. People are here because they want to be here. Most people in Nashville aren't from Nashville. They chose the city, and it usually wasn't for work. It was usually for some other reason. So that overall just, yeah, it gives the city a sense of community and an attitude that is pretty infectious.
So you find yourself in a new city.
Yeah.
You shared before we hit record that your definition of adulthood growing up was working in the city in New York.
Yeah.
And I suppose that very stereotyped view that maybe a lot of people in the UK share with London, kind of going into the city, corporate jobs. Here you are, you find yourself, as we say, in Nashville, and you build a company that's almost the opposite, the antithesis of that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Yeah, I remember.
Well, it is, and it'd be
Well,
interesting to know what made you go remote first, or native remote initially, because rewind 9 years. This is a long time before the pandemic and the route that a lot of organizations have found themselves forced down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my company in Boston, we actually had a really cool office. It was like in a big tower in the Fenway neighborhood, where there's like four-way 360 view of the city. I couldn't think of the word. So it was great. It was the top of a tower, very cool. So I spent a ton of time up in that office, way more than 40 hours a week. So it wasn't like against offices. In fact, I thought that we had like reached the peak of office, choice. When I moved to Nashville, it happened to be around the time I was starting Crystal, and it was just me, and I had hired one other engineer who also lived in Boston at the time, and so we were just building it. And it wasn't even really a thought. Obviously, he lives in Boston, I live in here, and we're just going to be doing pull requests on GitHub. Doesn't really matter where we are. So Crystal's DNA was remote, and that's kind of just continued. So once I started hiring, and first it was bootstrapped, then we raised some money. Mm-hmm. It just didn't really matter where people were. I had some people in Nashville because I met them here. So we got a little co-working space and stuff like that. But the whole thing started remote. So it wasn't much of a decision. It was more just like, okay, well, the people who are working on this don't necessarily live in the same place, so we're just going to roll with it. But it is funny because at first it didn't even feel real to me. It was like, this is a little project on the internet that we all kind of happen to be working on, not like a company. Because to me,
tribe rather than
right, to me, a company was Don Draper. You go to your, you go to your office.
And sit on your sofa and drink whiskey?
Exactly, yeah. And honestly, that kind of, even though that show wasn't around when I was a kid, I grew up in a suburb of New York where the dads would get on the train, go into the city, and then come back.
Yep.
And not all of them, but that was just like a very common thing. It's like that's how it was. And that was kind of in my head, subconscious or not, just the definition of like, all right, this is what I'm going to do eventually. I did do it for a small period of time. Learned that life wasn't, like that whole commuting thing wasn't really for me. So anyway, it's really funny how that it did change. It wasn't a conscious thing, it just happened.
You talked about the transience then of the community in Boston. It being a kind of a project that people were working on the internet, I suppose removes some of the problems of having a transient population, that if it was the four walls with the 360 view, you have an obvious issue that if someone leaves Boston then you leave. They leave you behind at the same time.
This is the thing that I think a lot of companies have learned since the pandemic, since they've been forced to go remote, is that there's a reason to go remote, and it's usually by necessity. For us, it was just the people who just were working on it were not in the same city. But during COVID, it was because you couldn't be in an office. And in some companies, you just need to be remote because there's some geographic component to it that you need to be spread out or whatever. But once you land there and you're in that world, the talent pool is irresistible, because the fact that you can have someone leave your city, move to another country, and continue working for you because they like their job and you like having them work for you, why would you ever trade that? Like, just because someone is not in your geographic area, and their spouse got some other opportunity somewhere else, or they want to move closer to family, therefore they need to leave the company. This doesn't compute, doesn't make any sense anymore. So there's like that side of it on the retention, but then the talent pool side of it. I posted a job earlier this year. It was overwhelming, but I posted a job and got like 2,000 applicants for it. Now that creates other problems in itself, but I was able to really, really whittle it down to get like the absolute best fits, because just the volume was so large. Because turns out Nashville's not a very big city. Putting out an application in the Nashville area is going to attract a certain number of candidates, but putting it out to the US, Canada, and really, I guess, anybody who's kind of in an English-speaking place within our time zones, like thousands of applicants, several really, really well-qualified applicants that I would never have access to in a small city like this. If I'm explaining it like an investor to me as the CEO, I'd be like, why would you ever just confine your search for executives to this tiny little place?
What would you say to those then who are pushing back to an in-office culture with kind of qualms about potential drops in productivity, or people who say, well, hang on a minute, we don't have the same team environment because we can't collaborate in quite the same way. Clearly this is working for you. I mean, how many staff are you today?
We're 30, so we're still a small company.
Yeah. But it's working.
Yes,
so
it works,
what has worked? What strategies have worked that you think negate some of those issues that people, maybe rightly or wrongly, feel do exist when it's a remote environment?
You have to start from if you were to start from scratch, just the economy reset, whatever, and you were to say, all right, let's build these companies, like a software company, for example, but I think this applies to any company where the primary output is like knowledge. We don't have to physically be there to manufacture something or provide a service or anything. I don't think offices would exist. I think we would have physical locations where we meet up, for whatever reason, because I think in-person communication, there's no replacement for that. And I think it's actually becoming an advantage now because it's more special, because it's more scarce, it's more valuable. But in terms of like every day getting work done, I don't believe that offices in the current form would exist. So I think there's a lot of reasons why someone would push back against remote work and want to return to the office. So it's hard to speak in those generalizations. But if I'm to generalize it, I think there's a lot of commercial real estate with a lot of leases that are long-term, 5, 10, 15 years. And we just need to use it, put it to good use. And I think there's a lot of baked-in assumptions about what work is that COVID revealed are not necessarily true. Like the fact that people can only get things done if they're in the office, and you need to see what they're doing. I don't think that certainly is not how it's been revealed to me personally, running Crystal. There was a time we had an office when we had people in there, and I could just say firsthand that I know that the productivity of being in the office versus having everybody just remote, especially when it comes to product type of roles, but even in more sales and customer success kind of roles, we're more productive today. Now that might not be related to the office situation. That might be a wash. But I think allowing people to weave work into their life in a way that is just like more sustainable actually yields more productivity. I don't know. I always use like the laundry example. Like laundry is such a pain in the neck. When you think about it, like laundry it's just always the maybe it's just me. Nobody likes doing laundry. Maybe there's a couple.
I don't think that's
people.
just you. But.
Got it. But when you have to work in an office, laundry is this like giant pain where you have to figure out how to you've got to wake up early, do this chore before you get to work, or it's eating into your off time where you get home at like 6 p.m. and you want to just like eat dinner, you want to hang out with friends, you want to get your life in, but you got this like thing, you're just like lurking. Oh, I got a pile of laundry I got to fold, you know? And it gives you like a half hour to do the thing. And it's just sits there in your head. Meanwhile, like in a remote world, I take this little tiny example of laundry. Laundry fits into your life because you've got these little breaks between meetings. You've got, you know, maybe you take a break during the day because you want to go for a walk or you've got your lunchtime. Yeah. You don't have a commute. So laundry just gets done at some point during the day and doesn't eat into like the rest of your life. That's such a stupid, simple little example. I think that those things compound over and over to where you could call it maybe it is less work hours because you're actually maybe working less hours than the hours sitting in an office. I won't debate that. That's probably true. But I would guess that
you would question the output of someone sat at a desk, though.
Well, right. Think about how much time, if you need to be somewhere for 8 hours or 9 hours, if you include like a lunch hour and stuff. Yeah, think about how much dead time there is where you need to create something to do because you're there. Yeah. And that to me is like, what are we living on this earth for? You know, we have very limited time. Like, I mean, for me, I think about it. I've got type 1 diabetes, and every single day I'm reminded, like, yeah, my life here is like a miracle of modern medicine. I do not want to spend a minute of just like obligatory, whether it's work or just obligatory busyness, just because I happen to have to be somewhere. Doesn't make any sense to me. So, yeah.
Drew, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for coming in.
Absolutely, yeah.
If someone wants to find out more about Crystal, how would they best do that?
Just go to our website, crystalknows.com. Yeah, that's really it. Just the website.
Cool. Well, look, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you.